The last inspection log for Relay Station 17 was submitted on March 2nd. It passed. Every metric nominal. Pressure differential within tolerance. Cathodic protection readings stable. Flow rate consistent across all 8 monitoring points. The inspector signed off at 4:47 p.m. He was reported missing at 6:15 p.m. His truck was found 11 miles east of the station, parked on the shoulder of County Road 9, engine running, driver door open. His clipboard was on the passenger seat. His pen was on the dashboard. His thermos was still warm. No footprints led away from the vehicle in any direction. I need to explain how I came to be here. My name is Dara Kessler, and I'm not a pipeline technician. I want to be clear about that from the beginning, because it matters. I'm a hydrology graduate student, was a hydrology graduate student, at the University of Arizona, and in the spring of last year I needed funding to finish my thesis on subsurface moisture migration in arid basins. My advisor had a contact at Crucible Energy, which operates a network of intermediate relay stations along a natural gas transmission corridor that runs roughly 240 miles across the Sonoran Desert between a processing hub outside of Gila Bend and a distribution junction near the California border. The relay stations are small. Concrete block buildings, maybe 800 square feet, housing pressure monitoring equipment, automated valve assemblies, and telemetry systems that report back to a central operations office in Phoenix. Most of the corridor is fully automated. But 3 of the stations, 11, 14, and 17, are what Crucible calls attended posts, meaning they maintain a human presence around the clock. The company's public explanation is that these 3 stations sit at critical junctures in the line where manual override capability is a regulatory requirement. The actual reason, I would learn, is different. I was hired as an attended post operator for Station 14, which sits in a shallow basin about 9 miles north of the Mexican border and 40 miles from the nearest paved road. The posting was 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Room and board provided. The pay was significantly more than my teaching assistantship, and the schedule left me time to work on my thesis using the station's satellite internet connection during the long hours between operational checks. My advisor saw no conflict. Crucible's HR department processed my application in 3 days, which struck me as fast for an energy company, but I was 26 and needed money. I arrived at Station 14 on April 9th. The outgoing operator was a man named Gil Peterson, who had held the post for 11 months. He was thin in a way that didn't look nutritional, more like something had been slowly tightening him from the inside. He showed me the systems, which were straightforward. Pressure gauges, flow meters, telemetry console, satellite uplink, diesel generator with a 7-day fuel reserve, and a manual valve override panel that required a physical key held in a lockbox on the wall. The living quarters were attached, a cot, a small kitchen, a chemical toilet, a shower rigged to a 500-gallon water tank that was refilled by truck every 12 days. Gil walked me through the operational checklist, which I was to complete every 4 hours, pressure readings at all monitoring points, flow rate confirmation, cathodic protection voltage, generator fuel level, water tank level, perimeter lighting check, and communication verification with Phoenix operations via satellite phone. The whole thing took about 20 minutes. The rest of the time was mine. Then he sat down on the cot and told me about the rules. He didn't call them rules. He called them the Sunset Protocol, and he read them off a laminated card that he pulled from his shirt pocket. The card was not Crucible issued. It was handwritten in small, neat print, then laminated at what looked like an office supply store. The edges were soft from handling. There were 5 items on the card. The first, after sunset, do not open the exterior door for any reason until sunrise, regardless of what you hear, see on the perimeter cameras, or believe to be happening outside. The second, after sunset, if the pressure readings at monitoring point 6 show a value of exactly 814.00 psi, do not log it. Enter 813.50 instead. Do not look at the gauge while correcting the number. The third, after sunset, if the satellite phone rings and the caller identifies themselves as being from the Belen office, end the call immediately. There is no Belen office. The fourth, after sunset, do not use the perimeter cameras to look south. The southern camera can be used for its automatic motion detection function but must not be accessed for manual viewing. The fifth, if, at any point after sunset, you hear a sound from beneath the station floor that resembles a rhythmic tapping, 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, put on the noise-canceling headphones stored in the top drawer of the monitoring desk and do not remove them until either the sound stops or the sun rises, whichever comes first. I stared at the card. Gil stared at me. "This isn't a joke," he said. I didn't say it was. "Okay." He put the card on the desk between us. "You're going to think it is, for the first couple of nights. That's fine. But follow them anyway." I asked him where the card came from. He said the operator before him had given it to him, and that operator had received it from the one before her. He didn't know how far back it went. I asked him if Crucible knew about the Sunset Protocol. He said he had no idea and that he'd never asked. I asked him what happened if you broke the rules. He picked up his bag and walked to the door. Then he stopped and said, without turning around, "The operator before the woman who trained me didn't follow number 1. He opened the door. They found his boots by the threshold, laces still tied. Nothing else. The company listed it as a voluntary separation. He left. I heard his truck start, and then I heard it fade into the distance, and then there was silence, the specific deep silence of the Sonoran Desert at midday in April, which is not really silence at all but a kind of vibration, as if the heat itself produces a frequency just below the threshold of hearing. I looked at the laminated card on the desk. I looked at the perimeter monitors. 4 cameras, 1 for each cardinal direction. The north camera showed the access road, a straight line of graded dirt disappearing into a shimmer of heat haze. The east camera showed open desert, creosote, cholya, a dry wash maybe 200 yards out. The west camera showed the pipeline right-of-way, a faint scar in the landscape where the soil had been disturbed during installation and never fully recovered. The south camera showed more desert, sloping gently upward toward a low ridge that obscured the border. Everything looked normal. I put the card in the top drawer of the monitoring desk, next to the noise-canceling headphones, and I began my first shift. The first 3 days were uneventful in a way that made the Sunset Protocol feel increasingly absurd. I completed my operational checks on schedule. I worked on my thesis. I ate canned soup and freeze-dried meals and drank instant coffee. The perimeter cameras showed nothing but desert, day and night. The satellite phone rang twice, both times Phoenix operations, confirming my check-in data. Monitoring point 6 read between 811 and 816 psi across my checks, never landing on exactly 814.00. Nobody called from a Belen office. I heard no tapping beneath the floor. I did follow the rules, though. I kept the exterior door locked after sunset. I didn't manually access the south camera at night. I kept the headphones within reach. This felt like superstition, which is what it was, but Gil's delivery had been so flat and so genuinely unperformative that I extended him the courtesy of compliance. On the fourth night, monitoring point 6 read 814.00. It was during my 10 p.m. check. I was going through the readings in order, logging each one on the paper form and entering it into the digital telemetry system. Points 1 through 5 were unremarkable. I tabbed to point 6. 814.00. Not 813.97. Not 814.03. Exactly 814.00. I remember my pen stopping on the paper. I remember the fluorescent light buzzing above me. I remember the specific quality of the quiet, the generator humming outside, the faint electronic whine of the telemetry console, and beneath both, a lower register of silence that I was only beginning to recognize as the desert itself settling into its nighttime configuration. I wrote 813.50 on the paper form. I entered 813.50 into the digital system. I did not look at the gauge. This required effort, because the gauge for monitoring point 6 was mounted on the wall directly to the left of the telemetry console, roughly at eye level. Not looking at it meant turning my head slightly to the right and keeping it there while my hand finished typing. It felt ridiculous. It felt like a game a child would play. But something in the room had changed. The quality of the air, maybe. The acoustic character of the silence. I can't describe it precisely. It was as if the station had become aware that I was completing the check, and was waiting to see what I would do. I entered 813.50 and moved on to point 7. By the time I finished the full checklist, the feeling had passed. I went to bed. The next morning, I checked point 6 during my 6 a.m. round. It read 812.40. Normal variance. I looked directly at the gauge this time. It was an analog dial, standard industrial grade, with a needle and printed markings. Nothing unusual about it. I looked at it for a long time. That afternoon I tried to research Relay Station 14's operational history. The station's filing cabinet contained maintenance logs going back about 3 years, all routine. There was no mention of the sunset protocol, no references to any anomalies, no incident reports. The personnel records were minimal, just names and dates of assignment for the previous 4 operators. Gil Peterson, 11 months. Before him, a woman named Sandra Cho, 9 months. Before her, a man named Roy Delacroix, 14 months. Before him, a name that had been redacted with a black marker so thoroughly that not even a letter count was discernible. The redaction was not official. It had been done with a Sharpie, by hand, applied so heavily that the paper was slightly depressed. Someone had pressed hard. I photographed the page and kept working. Over the next week, I settled into a rhythm that I recognize now as the specific kind of comfort that dangerous places cultivate in the people who stay in them. The desert was beautiful. My thesis work was progressing. The operational checks were meditative in their repetition. I began to appreciate the structure of the days, the 4-hour intervals, the precise notations, the physical walk-around of the station perimeter every morning to check for damage, wildlife intrusion, or erosion near the foundation. The sunset protocol became routine. Door locked. South camera untouched. Headphones ready. On the 11th night, the satellite phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I was asleep. The phone was on the desk, 12 feet from my cot. It had a distinctive ring, 2 short tones followed by a longer one, and it cut through my sleep like a blade. I crossed the room and picked it up. Station 14, Kessler. A pause. Then a man's voice, clear and professional. This is the Belen office calling to confirm your midnight readings. Can you verify your pressure at point 6? I hung up. My hand was shaking. Not from fear, exactly, from the speed of recognition. The card had said, the Belen office, and the voice had said, the Belen office, and the match was so precise that it felt rehearsed, as if whoever was on the other end had read the same card I had. I stood in the middle of the station with the phone in my hand, looking at nothing. The phone did not ring again that night. In the morning, I checked the satellite phone's call log. The incoming call at 2:17 a.m. was listed. The originating number was a string of digits that began with a country code I didn't recognize. I wrote it down and, during my next internet session, tried to look it up. The country code didn't correspond to any nation. It wasn't a valid prefix for satellite systems, VoIP services, or any telecommunications standard I could find. I called Phoenix Operations during my regular check-in and asked, as casually as I could, whether Crucible had a facility in Belen. Belen, New Mexico, the dispatcher asked. I don't know. Just Belen. Not that I'm aware of. Why? Received a call last night, thought it might be a wrong number. Was it on the sat phone? Yes. A pause. That's strange. The sat phone is on a closed network. Only our dispatch and the other attended posts can reach it. Let me check the log. Another pause. I'm not showing any outgoing calls to your station from our side between your 10 p.m. check-in and your 6 a.m. check-in. It rang at 2:17. I believe you, but it's not in our system. Might be atmospheric skip. Sat phones can pick up stray signals in certain ionospheric conditions. I wouldn't worry about it. I thanked her and hung up. I worried about it. The 12th day was when I broke the 4th rule. I want to be honest about this because the sequence of events that follows depends on understanding exactly what I did and why. It was 9:40 p.m. I had completed my evening check. Everything was nominal. I was sitting at the desk working on a chapter of my thesis about vadose zone moisture retention, and I was bored in the particular way that the desert makes you bored, not restless but hollow, as if the emptiness outside is slowly equalizing with something inside you. I opened the camera control interface. North camera, empty road, moonlit. East camera, desert, a kangaroo rat moving at the edge of the frame. West camera, pipeline scar, motionless. South camera. I clicked on it. The feed loaded. Standard infrared night vision, green-gray palette. The terrain sloped upward toward the low ridge, just as it did during the day. Creosote bushes. Rocky soil. A clear sky with a quarter moon. And standing on the ridge, facing the station, a line of figures. I counted 11. They were spaced evenly, maybe 10 feet apart, along the crest of the ridge. They were standing upright. They were motionless. In the infrared, they registered as slightly warmer than the surrounding terrain, which meant they were physically present and radiating heat, but their outlines were wrong. Not blurred, wrong. The edges of their forms didn't transition smoothly into the background the way a human silhouette would. Instead, each figure seemed to occupy a space that the camera couldn't fully resolve, as if they were standing in a slightly different version of the landscape than the one the camera was recording. I watched for 4 minutes. None of them moved. Then, simultaneously, all 11 turned their heads to the left. Not their bodies. Their heads. In a single synchronized motion, as if responding to a cue I couldn't perceive. I closed the camera feed. My hands were trembling. My throat was dry. I stood up, walked to the sink, poured a glass of water, drank it, poured another, and drank that. I did not open the south camera again. I did not sleep. At sunrise, I went outside, the first time I had opened the exterior door since the previous morning, and walked to the south side of the station. The ridge was visible, maybe 400 yards away. There was nothing on it. I walked toward it. This was not in my operational mandate. My perimeter check extended 50 feet from the station in every direction, no further. But I walked south across the desert floor, through the creosote and the brittle bush, until I reached the base of the ridge and climbed to the crest. The ground where the figures had stood was undisturbed. No footprints. No compressed soil. No marks of any kind. But the soil in that area was different. It was darker than the surrounding terrain, and when I crouched and touched it, it was cool. Not cold, cool. In the Sonoran Desert at 7 a.m. in April, exposed soil should already be warming. This soil felt like it had been in shade for hours, except there was no shade. There was nothing above it but open sky. I collected a sample in a specimen bag from my thesis kit. Back at the station, I ran a basic pH and moisture test. The soil was slightly alkaline, consistent with the region, but the moisture content was 23%. The surrounding desert soil, which I tested for comparison, was at 4%. 23% moisture in soil that received no irrigation, no rainfall, and no subsurface seep that I could detect. This was, technically, relevant to my thesis. I documented everything. Photographs, GPS coordinates, test results, timestamps. I uploaded the data to my university cloud storage. Then I sat at the monitoring desk and looked at the laminated card. Don't use the south camera for manual viewing after sunset. I had broken that rule. I had seen the figures. Nothing had happened to me. Except now I knew they were there. I called Sandra Cho 3 days later. Finding her took some effort. Crucible's personnel records at the station were minimal, but I had her name and approximate employment dates. A search through my university's alumni network turned up a Sandra Cho who had done environmental engineering coursework at ASU, which was close enough geographically to be plausible. I emailed her from my personal account, identifying myself as the current operator at Station 14 and asking if she'd be willing to talk. She responded in 4 minutes. Don't call me from the sat phone, she wrote. Use your cell if you have signal. If not, email only. I had no cell signal at the station. I emailed back. What followed was a correspondence that lasted 9 days and that I have preserved in its entirety. I'll summarize the relevant portions. Sandra confirmed the existence of the Sunset Protocol. She had received the laminated card from Roy Delacroix, who had received it from the redacted name before him. She had followed all 5 rules without exception for the entire 9 months of her posting. I asked her about the figures on the ridge. I never looked, she wrote. I followed the protocol. I asked her why she left. Because on my last night, the tapping started. 3 and 3. And it didn't stop at sunrise. I asked her to elaborate. It continued into the morning. Into the afternoon. I put the headphones on and kept them on for 11 hours. When I finally took them off, the tapping had stopped, but the silence afterward was different. Not quieter. Listening. The silence was listening. I requested reassignment the same day. I asked her about the Belen call. I got it twice. Both times I hung up immediately. After the second time, I unplugged the sat phone between checks. Phoenix never noticed, or never said anything. I asked her about monitoring point 6. She didn't respond for 2 days. When she did, her email was 3 sentences. It read 814.00 on 7 of my shifts. I entered 813.50 every time. On the 8th time I accidentally looked at the gauge while correcting the number, and the needle wasn't pointing at 814. It was pointing at me. I read that sentence 4 times. I closed the laptop. The 17th night. 10 p.m. check. Monitoring points 1 through 5, normal. Point 6. 814.00. I wrote 813.50. I entered 813.50 into the digital system. I did not look at the gauge. But this time, as I was typing, I heard it. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. From beneath the floor. The station sits on a concrete slab foundation. There is no basement, no crawl space, no subsurface utility access. I had reviewed the construction drawings during my first week. The slab is 18 inches of reinforced concrete poured directly onto compacted desert soil. There is nothing beneath the floor. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. The rhythm was precise. Mechanical. Each tap was identical in volume and duration, spaced at exact intervals. It sounded like someone knocking on the underside of the concrete with a single knuckle. I opened the top drawer. I put on the noise-canceling headphones. They were good ones, industrial grade, the kind used on airport tarmacs. The world went quiet. I sat at the desk with the headphones on and waited. After about an hour, I lifted one ear cup slightly. Silence. I removed the headphones fully. Silence. Normal silence. Generator, telemetry hum, desert. I went to bed. At 3 a.m., the tapping woke me. 3. Pause. 3. But it was different now. It was no longer coming from beneath the floor. It was coming from inside the wall behind my cot. The same rhythm, the same precision, but the sound had migrated. It had moved from below me to beside me, and it was closer. I put the headphones on and did not remove them until sunlight came through the window at 5:52 a.m. In the morning, I inspected the exterior wall behind my cot. Solid concrete block. No cavities, no conduit runs, no reason for any sound to originate from within it. I knocked on the wall with my own knuckle. Solid. I got down on my hands and knees and put my ear to the floor. From far below, far enough that it might have been imagined, 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. In daylight. Sandra had said it continued past sunrise on her last night. I was entering the same phase. I stood up and walked outside. The sun was already brutal. The desert stretched in every direction, featureless and absolute. I looked south toward the ridge. There was nothing there. But the ridge itself seemed closer. Not dramatically, maybe 20 or 30 feet. As if the terrain between the station and the ridge had compressed slightly overnight. I had no surveying equipment precise enough to confirm this. I had my GPS and the station's fixed coordinates and the coordinates I had logged when I walked to the ridge 6 days earlier. I pulled up both coordinates and calculated the distance. The ridge was 19 feet closer than it had been on the day I walked to it. I checked my math 3 times. I checked my GPS calibration. I checked the station's fixed position against Crucible's published coordinates. 19 feet. I sat down on the ground outside the station and tried to think clearly. The desert was quiet. A red-tailed hawk circled to the east. The pipeline right-of-way stretched west, motionless. Everything was normal and sunlit and vast, and the ridge was 19 feet closer than it should have been. That afternoon, I did something I had been avoiding. I searched for the redacted name. I couldn't recover it from the personnel file, the marker had been applied too thoroughly. But I searched Crucible Energy's public records, news archives, and OSHA incident databases for any event associated with Relay Station 14. I found one result. An OSHA incident report from 7 years earlier, classification, employee non-occupational disappearance, no workplace contributing factors identified. The employee's name was Calvin Rice. His job title was listed as attended post operator. The station was listed as RS-14. The report stated that Mr. Rice had failed to complete a scheduled communication check-in, and that a response team dispatched to the station had found it unoccupied. The exterior door was open. Mr. Rice's personal belongings were inside. A pair of work boots was found at the threshold of the exterior door, consistent with having been removed or vacated in place. No further evidence of Mr. Rice's location was discovered. The report concluded, no workplace hazard identified. Employee status reclassified to voluntary separation pending further information. I looked at the laminated card again. The handwriting was small and neat. I tried to imagine Calvin Rice writing it. I tried to imagine him standing at the desk, writing each rule carefully, then driving to a town somewhere and laminating it, and then driving back to give it to whoever came next. Except Calvin Rice hadn't given it to anyone. Calvin Rice had disappeared from the threshold of his own door. Which meant the card predated him. Which meant someone before Calvin Rice had written it, and it had passed through Calvin, through Roy Delacroix, through Sandra Cho, through Gil Peterson, and now to me. And Calvin had followed the rules, presumably, for some period of time. And then he had broken number 1. The boots at the threshold. Laces still tied. I emailed Sandra and asked if she had ever heard the name Calvin Rice. That's the name Roy wouldn't say, she responded. He told me someone before him had opened the door. He wouldn't tell me the name. He said the name was in the file but that he'd made it so no one could read it. Roy Delacroix had redacted Calvin Rice's name. Not Crucible. Not any institutional authority. Roy, with a Sharpie, pressing hard enough to depress the paper. As if saying the name, even reading it, was itself dangerous. I was on night 18 when I understood why the South Camera rule existed. Not because of what you would see. I had seen the figures and nothing had happened to me. The rule wasn't about protecting you from them. It was about protecting you from what looking did to the distance. I had looked south on night 12. On the morning of night 13, the ridge was 19 feet closer. I had not looked south since. But each morning, I walked outside and estimated the distance, and each morning, it was the same. The ridge was 19 feet closer than the original measurement, but no closer than that. The distance had stabilized. The rule wasn't, don't look south because something bad is on the ridge. The rule was, don't look south because looking south brings the ridge closer, and it doesn't go back. I thought about every previous operator. How many of them had looked? How many times? How much closer the ridge had been for each successive person? I pulled up satellite imagery of the station's location on my laptop. In the most recent image, dated 8 months prior, the ridge appeared to be approximately 400 yards from the station. When I had arrived, it had been roughly 400 yards. After my single look, it was now roughly 380. But the earliest satellite image I could find, from 11 years ago, before the station was built, showed the ridge at what appeared to be nearly a mile south. The ridge had been moving toward the station for over a decade. Incrementally. In response to being observed through the south camera at night. Each operator who had looked, even once, had pulled it closer. And whatever stood on it was coming with it. I stopped going outside through the south-facing door. I stopped looking south at all, even during the day. This was not rational. The card said nothing about daytime observation. But rationality had lost its utility as an organizing principle somewhere around the time the soil on a desert ridge tested at 23% moisture. Night 21. The tapping had become constant. Not loud. Not urgent. Just present. 3 and 3, repeating beneath the floor and within the walls, migrating slowly around the station over the course of each night like something pacing a circuit below me. The headphones blocked it, but I could feel it through the soles of my feet, a faint vibration, perfectly rhythmic, that continued from sunset to sunrise and, increasingly, into the morning hours. I wore the headphones for most of each night. I slept in fragments. My thesis work stopped. During my 2 a.m. check on night 21, I lifted one ear cup to listen for the tapping and heard something else instead. A voice. Outside. South side of the station. It was calling my name. Dara. Clear. Calm. Conversational in tone, as if the speaker was standing just outside the wall and addressing me through it. Dara, can you open the door? I did not recognize the voice. It was male, middle-aged, with no particular accent. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like a colleague who had arrived unannounced and was politely asking to be let in. Dara, it's cold out here. It was April in the Sonoran Desert. The overnight low was 68 degrees. I put the headphones back on. The voice came twice more over the next 3 nights. Always from the south wall. Always using my name. Always calm. On the third occurrence, it said something that made me stop breathing. Dara, I left my boots inside. I pulled the headphones down so hard against my skull that my ears ached for an hour afterward. On night 24, the satellite phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I let it ring. It rang 14 times and stopped. It rang again at 2:17 the following night. And the night after that. Always at 2:17. Always 14 rings. I never answered it again. I began unplugging the phone between operational check-ins, the way Sandra had. Phoenix operations never noticed. Or never said anything. I began composing an email to my advisor. I wrote 4 drafts. In the first, I described everything, the rules, the figures, the tapping, the voice, the ridge, the soil moisture data. I read it back and deleted it. It sounded like a breakdown. In the second draft, I focused only on the soil moisture anomaly, framing it as an unexpected finding relevant to my thesis. This was true but incomplete. In the third, I simply asked to be replaced at the station, citing personal reasons. In the fourth, I asked whether anyone at the university had contacts at USGS or any federal agency that monitored subsurface geological anomalies in the Sonoran Desert. I sent the fourth draft. My advisor responded the next day, "Funny you should ask. There's a USGS hydrogeology team that did a survey of that exact area about 8 years ago. The report was filed but never published. I can try to get you a copy through interlibrary channels. Everything okay out there?" I told him everything was fine. The USGS report arrived 6 days later as a PDF attachment. It was 47 pages, dense with data tables and stratigraphic profiles, and it had been authored by a 3-person team that had spent 2 weeks conducting a groundwater assessment of the basin surrounding Relay Station 14. Most of the report was routine. Aquifer depth, recharge rates, soil composition. Standard hydrogeological survey work. Except for Appendix D. Appendix D was titled, Anomalous Subsurface Thermal and Acoustic Observations, and was 3 pages long. It described, in careful scientific language, 2 findings that the authors could not explain. First, a persistent thermal differential at a depth of approximately 40 meters directly beneath the station's coordinates. The subsurface temperature at that depth was 11 degrees Celsius cooler than predicted by the regional geothermal gradient, and the cool zone extended southward in a narrow column toward the ridge I had been watching. The authors noted that this was inconsistent with any known geological process and recommended further investigation. Second, during overnight monitoring, the team's buried geophones had detected a rhythmic acoustic signal originating from the cool zone. The signal was described as a repeating percussive pattern of 3 pulses followed by a pause of approximately 1.3 seconds, then 3 additional pulses, repeating at consistent intervals. 3 and 3. The authors noted that the signal does not correspond to any known seismic, hydrological, or biological source, and that it appeared to intensify when surface-level activity near the station increased. The report recommended a follow-up investigation. A handwritten note in the margin of the PDF, scanned from the physical document, read, "Follow-up denied. Site access restricted per, redacted, coordination. Do not resurvey." The note wasn't signed. I read Appendix D 3 times, then closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The tapping was beneath me. 3 and 3. Constant now, day and night, a rhythm I could feel in my teeth if I pressed my jaw together. 40 meters below me, something was knocking. It had been knocking for at least 8 years, since the USGS survey. It had probably been knocking for much longer than that. And every night, the ridge came closer, and the figures on the ridge stood watching, and the voice outside asked to be let in, and the phone rang from a number that didn't exist, and the pressure at monitoring point 6 landed on 814.00 with a precision that was not mechanical but intentional. On my 28th night, I broke the second rule. Not deliberately. I was exhausted. The headphones had been on for 6 hours. I was completing my 2 a.m. check on autopilot, writing numbers on the paper form without fully processing them. I logged point 6 as 813.50 as instructed, but as I entered the number into the digital system, my eyes drifted left. I looked at the gauge. The needle was not pointing at 814. It was pointing at me. The needle had rotated past the end of the printed scale, past the mechanical stop that should have prevented further movement, and was oriented horizontally, extending outward from the gauge face directly toward my eyes. It was physically impossible. The needle was a rigid metal indicator mounted on a central pivot. It could not extend beyond its designed arc of motion. But it was pointing at me. Not at the space I occupied. At me. At whatever I am behind my eyes. I looked away. When I looked back, 3 seconds later, maybe 4, the needle was at 814.00. I left the monitoring desk. I went to my cot. I did not complete the rest of the check. For the first time in 28 days, I missed data points. Phoenix Operations called in the morning to ask about the gap in my telemetry submissions. I told them the satellite uplink had glitched. They accepted this without question. My last night at Station 14 was night 29. I had already submitted my reassignment request to Crucible's HR department, citing thesis obligations. They processed it in 2 days, the same speed as my initial hiring. A replacement was scheduled to arrive on April 8. I would overlap with them for 1 day, the same way Gil had overlapped with me. I had already made a copy of the laminated card. I had already decided to pass it on. But on night 29, at 11:47 p.m., something happened that was not on the card. The telemetry console displayed a routine system status message. I almost didn't read it. I had seen hundreds of them over the past month, all identical. But this one was different. Station 14, system status, 23 hours 47 minutes and 12 seconds. All monitoring points nominal. Pressure, nominal. Flow, nominal. Cathodic, nominal. Generator, nominal. Personnel, 2. I stared at the screen. Personnel, 2. I was the only person at the station. The personnel count was generated automatically by the station's access control system, which logged badge swipes at the exterior door. Only 1 badge had been active since Gil's departure, mine. I checked the access log. 2 badges active. Mine, swiped in on April 9th. And 1 swiped in on a date that preceded the station's construction by 4 years. The badge belonged to no one in Crucible's personnel database. The ID number was a string of zeros. The swipe-in had no corresponding swipe-out. Whoever, whatever, had badged in before the station existed was still logged as present. Had always been logged as present. Every system status message for the entire life of the station had read personnel, 2. I had simply never noticed, because I had never considered that the number should be 1. I looked at the floor beneath my feet. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. The rhythm was patient. Unhurried. It had the quality of someone who has been waiting for a very long time and is prepared to wait much longer. I put on the headphones. In the morning, I packed my things. The replacement operator arrived at 2 p.m., a woman in her early 30s named Yvette, who had a background in environmental monitoring and was cheerful in the way of someone who didn't yet know what the nights were like. I showed her the systems. I walked her through the operational checklist. I showed her the generator, the water tank, the perimeter cameras. Then I sat her down and gave her the laminated card. She read it. She looked at me. Is this serious? Yes. Has anything actually? Follow them. All 5. Every night. Don't look south. Don't answer the Belen call. Don't look at the gauge when you correct point 6. Don't open the door. Wear the headphones when you hear the tapping. When? When? Not if. She stared at the card for a long time. "The person before you," she said. "Did they follow the rules?" "Yes." "Did they add any?" I hesitated. I could have told her about the ridge, about the distance, about the USGS report and the 40-meter thermal anomaly and the personnel count that had always been wrong. I could have told her about the voice that knew Calvin Rice's boots were inside. But the card had 5 rules. Not 6. Not 10. 5. And every operator who had followed them had survived. The ones who hadn't, Calvin Rice at his threshold, had not. The rules weren't an explanation. They were a negotiation. Someone, a long time ago, had figured out the minimum terms for coexistence with whatever lived beneath and south of Station 14, and they had written those terms on a card, and the card had kept people alive. Adding to it might help. Or it might alter the terms. "No," I said. 5 rules. Follow them exactly. I drove north on the access road, and the station shrank in my rearview mirror, and the ridge behind it was visible for a long time before the road curved and the desert took them both. I finished my thesis 4 months later. The soil moisture data from the ridge made it into Chapter 6, contextualized as an unexplained localized anomaly warranting further study. My committee accepted it without comment. I don't work for Crucible anymore. I don't go to the desert. But I check the OSHA database every few months. Station 14 shows no incidents. Yvette's name doesn't appear in any filings. As far as I can tell, she's still there, or she's left and passed the card to someone else, and the chain continues. The tapping hasn't followed me. The voice hasn't followed me. The phone doesn't ring at 2:17 a.m. anymore. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment and the building settles around me, I feel something beneath my feet that might be a vibration and might be nothing. 3. Pause. 3. And I put my headphones on, even here, even now, even though there's no card that tells me to. Because the negotiation isn't with the station. It never was. The station is just where they taught you the terms. The station is just where they taught you the terms. I told myself that for 7 months. I defended my thesis in August. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Tucson, took a research position with a private environmental consulting firm, and spent my days doing exactly the kind of work I had trained for: soil analysis, groundwater modeling, site assessments for developers who needed to prove their subdivisions wouldn't contaminate the aquifer. Normal work. Daylight work. Work that stayed inside the boundaries of measurement and didn't ask me to falsify a single number. The headphones sat in the top drawer of my nightstand. I told myself they were for noise. The neighbors upstairs had a toddler. The building's HVAC unit cycled on at unpredictable intervals. There were reasons to own noise-canceling headphones. I didn't put them on because of the vibration. I put them on because the vibration was getting more precise. In the first weeks after leaving the station, it was barely there, a faint tremor in the floor, almost subliminal, present only when I was still and the apartment was silent. I could attribute it to the building's infrastructure. Old pipes. The compressor in the parking garage below. Traffic on the boulevard 2 blocks east. The rational explanations were plentiful and I used each one in rotation. But by September, the rhythm was unmistakable. 3 and 3. Not constant, it came in intervals, usually late at night, usually when I was alone. It would start around 11 p.m. and continue until sometime after I fell asleep. In the morning it would be gone, and the floor would feel like a floor, and I would drink my coffee and drive to work and not think about it until the next night. I ran tests. I borrowed a portable accelerometer from the firm's equipment locker and placed it on my apartment floor on 3 separate nights. The device was sensitive enough to register a footstep 2 rooms away. Night 1, no anomalous readings. The accelerometer recorded the building's ambient vibration profile, HVAC cycling, intermittent traffic, and nothing else. Night 2, same result. Night 3, at 11:23 p.m., a rhythmic pulse appeared in the data. 3 peaks, evenly spaced at 0.4-second intervals. A gap of 1.3 seconds. 3 more peaks. Repeating. The amplitude was 0.003 millimeters per second. Almost nothing. Well below the threshold of human perception for most people under most conditions. But I perceived it. I had been trained to perceive it by 29 nights of sleeping on top of it. The frequency was 7.2 Hz. I noted this because it was specific and because, when I later cross-referenced it with the USGS report from the desert, the geophones beneath Station 14 had recorded the tapping at the same frequency. 7.2 Hz. In the desert, 40 meters underground. In my apartment in Tucson, on the 2nd floor of a wood frame building with no geological connection to the Sonoran Basin south of Gila Bend. Same frequency. Same rhythm. Same 1.3-second pause. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with the accelerometer data on my laptop screen and watched the waveform repeat itself in perfect intervals while the floor beneath me transmitted each pulse into the bones of my feet. The next morning I called Sandra Cho. She answered on the first ring. "You feel it," she said, before I could speak. "Yes." "How long since you left the station?" 7 months. A pause. "It took me 4 months for it to start. 4 months for it to become rhythmic. I felt something within the first 2 weeks, but it was diffuse. Like a hum. The 3-and-3 pattern didn't establish itself until month 4. I closed my eyes. "Where are you?" "Portland. 3rd floor apartment. Concrete building." "It doesn't matter. I moved twice." Sandra Cho moved from Tucson to Portland to get away from a vibration, and the vibration was waiting for me in Portland before I finished unpacking. That's not possible. It's a localized subsurface phenomenon. The USGS report. The USGS report describes what their instruments detected at one location at one time. It doesn't describe what the thing is. I didn't have a response to that. "Have you talked to Roy?" I asked. Roy Delacroix disappeared 14 months after leaving the station. The word landed in my chest like a stone. Disappeared how? He stopped answering calls. I drove to his address in Flagstaff. The landlord said he'd paid his rent 3 months in advance, packed one bag, and told her he was driving south. That was 2 years ago. No one has heard from him since. South. I need you to listen to me, Dara. The vibration doesn't stay at 0.003 forever. In my case, it's been increasing by roughly 0.001 millimeters per second per month. It's been 3 years. I'm at 0.039 now. Visitors to my apartment can feel it. My downstairs neighbor filed a noise complaint. I told her it was a massage chair. What happens when it gets louder? Sandra didn't answer for a long time. When she did, Her voice was flat. I think you already know. The door. Not literally. The door is just the version of it they gave us at the station. Out here, the door is whatever you walk through to go toward it. You'll start wanting to face south. You'll start checking distances. You'll start feeling like something is closer than it was yesterday, even though there's no ridge and no desert and no camera to look through. The negotiation doesn't end when you leave. It just changes venue. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear and listened to the silence between us, and beneath the silence, beneath the electronic hiss of the cellular connection, I could hear, or thought I could hear, a faint rhythmic pulse. 3 and 3. Sandra. Yeah. Why didn't you put this on the card? Because the card is for the station. The card keeps you alive while you're there. What happens after is a different contract, and I don't have the terms for it yet. She hung up. I spent the next 3 weeks trying to be a scientist about it. I set up the accelerometer as a permanent monitoring station in my apartment. I logged the vibration data every night. I built a spreadsheet tracking onset time, duration, amplitude, frequency, and any environmental correlations I could identify: weather, traffic volume, seismic activity reported by USGS monitoring stations in southern Arizona, lunar phase, barometric pressure. I was thorough. I was methodical. I treated it like fieldwork. The data was consistent and unambiguous. The vibration appeared every night between 10:30 p.m. and 11:45 p.m., continued until between 4 a.m. and 5:30 a.m., and maintained a constant frequency of 7.2 Hz throughout. The amplitude was increasing at the rate Sandra had described, approximately 0.001 mm per second per month. No environmental variable I could identify correlated with its onset, duration, or intensity. In the 4th week, I added a directional component to my monitoring. I placed 3 accelerometers in a triangular array across my apartment floor, spaced 6 feet apart, and used the phase differential between them to determine the direction of wave propagation. The signal was coming from the south. Not from below. From the south. The wave front was arriving at my south-facing wall fractionally before it reached the north-facing wall, which meant the source was not beneath my building but somewhere to the south of it, transmitting horizontally through whatever medium connected that point to mine. I calculated the bearing, 197 degrees magnetic. I pulled up a map and drew a line from my apartment at 197 degrees. The line passed through 73 miles of Sonoran Desert and intersected the coordinates of Relay Station 14. I closed the map application and sat in my kitchen and pressed my palms flat against the table and felt the wood vibrate beneath my skin. 3 and 3. Patient. Precise. Coming from the place I had left but also from something that the place was merely the closest surface expression of, something that extended beneath the desert floor and beneath the city and beneath the 60 miles of rock and soil between them, reaching for me through the substrate of the earth itself. In November, the Belen call returned. Not on the satellite phone. On my cell. 2:17 a.m. I was awake. I was usually awake by then, because the vibration made deep sleep impossible during its active hours. My phone lit up on the nightstand. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I let it ring 14 times. It stopped. I checked the call log. The number was the same impossible string of digits that had appeared on the station's satellite phone log 9 months earlier. The same non-existent country code. The same sequence. The next night, 2:17 a.m. 14 rings. Unknown number. The night after that, same. I blocked the number. The calls continued. Blocking had no effect. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. every night for 11 consecutive nights, 14 rings each time, from a number that my phone's operating system could not prevent from reaching me. On the 12th night, I turned the phone off entirely before going to bed. I pressed and held the power button until the screen went black, confirmed it was fully shut down, and placed it face down on the nightstand. At 2:17 a.m., the phone rang. The screen was dark. The device was powered off. But the speaker emitted the ringtone, 14 cycles, and then stopped. When I picked up the phone and held the power button, it booted normally, showing no record of any incoming call. I stopped turning my phone off. There was no point. Whatever was calling me did not require my phone to be operational in order to ring it. I answered on night 23. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Exhaustion. The particular kind of surrender that comes not from fear but from the recognition that avoidance is consuming more energy than confrontation would. I picked up the phone at the second ring and said nothing. Station 14, this is the Belen office. The same voice. Male, professional, unhurried. We're showing a discrepancy in your telemetry. Can you verify your pressure at point 6? I'm not at station 14. A pause. 2 seconds. 3. Can you verify your pressure at point 6? I don't have a point 6. I'm in my apartment in Tucson. Another pause, longer this time. Then, your current reading is 814.00. Would you like to enter a correction? I hung up. My hands were steady. My breathing was normal. The fear was there, but it was the old fear, the deep, structural kind that doesn't spike your heart rate but changes the way you understand the room you're sitting in. I looked at the south wall of my apartment. There was nothing unusual about it. Drywall, painted eggshell white, a framed print I'd bought at a street market. A window with blinds drawn. But the wall felt thinner. Not physically. I couldn't have articulated what I meant by that if someone had asked. It was a proprioceptive sensation, a shift in spatial awareness, as if the distance between me and whatever lay beyond that wall had decreased in a way that had nothing to do with architecture. I measured the room the next morning. 15 feet, 4 inches from north wall to south wall. Exactly what the floor plan specified. I measured it again a week later. 15 feet, 2 inches. I measured it with a laser distance meter. I measured it with a tape measure. I measured it 3 times with each instrument. 15 feet, 2 inches. The room was smaller. The south wall was closer by 2 inches. And I knew, the way I knew about the ridge, the way I knew about the gauge needle, the way I knew about the boots at the threshold, that measuring it was what had made it move. I stopped measuring. In December, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The domain was crucible-energy.com, but the sender's name was listed as Attended Post Operations, Historical. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained a single attachment, a PDF titled, RS-14 Attended Post Operator Assignment Record, Complete. I opened it. The document was a table. 2 columns, name and dates of assignment. It listed every operator who had ever been posted to Station 14, going back to the station's commissioning date 11 years earlier. There were 19 names. I had known about 5, myself, Gil, Sandra, Roy, and Calvin Rice. The other 14 were strangers. But what stopped me was the structure of the list. The first operator was assigned on the station's commissioning date. The last operator on the list was Yvette Reardon, the woman I had trained. Her assignment start date was listed as April 8th, which was correct. Her end date was blank, which meant she was presumably still there. But after Yvette's entry, there was one more row. Name, Dara Kessler. Assignment start, blank. Assignment end, blank. I was on the list twice. My original posting, April 9th through May 7th, appeared in its correct chronological position. And then I appeared again at the bottom, after Yvette, with no dates. As if I hadn't started yet. As if I was scheduled to return. I forwarded the email to Sandra. She responded within minutes. I got the same email 2 years ago. My name was at the bottom then. Now it's probably further up the list. Don't reply to it. Don't click anything else. Don't go back. I didn't reply. I didn't click anything else. But I kept the PDF. The winter was long and I didn't sleep well, and the vibration grew incrementally louder, and the south wall of my apartment didn't move again, or I didn't measure it again. And the phone rang at 2:17 every night and I didn't answer it, and I wore the headphones to bed, and I went to work in the morning and ran soil permeability tests for housing developers and came home and ate dinner and felt the floor tremble beneath me in groups of 3. In February, I made a decision that I have not been able to fully explain to myself even now. I drove south. Not to the station. I didn't take County Road 9. I drove south on I-19 toward Nogales, then turned west on Route 289, then south again on a series of unmarked ranch roads that took me into the open desert. I didn't have a destination. I had a bearing, 197 degrees. The same bearing the accelerometer array had identified. I drove along it as closely as the roads allowed, and when the roads ended, I parked and walked. The desert in February is different from the desert in April. Cooler. The light has a quality of provisional gentleness, as if the landscape is resting between punishments. The creosote was gray-green. A few brittlebush were blooming early, small yellow flowers close to the ground. The sky was enormous and the silence was total, and I walked south across the basin floor with nothing in my hands and no plan. After about 2 miles, I stopped. I was standing in open desert. No ridge. No station. No visible landmark in any direction except the faint tire tracks behind me and the mountains on the horizon. The soil beneath my boots was standard desert alluvium, sandy, alkaline, dry. But the vibration was stronger here. Not subtle. Not subliminal. I could feel it in my knees, in my hips, in the base of my skull. 3 and 3. The rhythm was the same, but the amplitude was significantly greater than anything I'd experienced in my apartment. The ground itself was pulsing. I knelt and placed my palm flat on the soil. Warm. Not hot. Warm. The way skin is warm. The way something alive is warm, just beneath the surface, waiting. I stayed like that for a long time, kneeling in the desert with my hand on the ground, feeling the 3 and 3 rhythm travel up my arm and into my chest. It was not unpleasant. That's the part one need to be honest about. It was not painful or frightening or repulsive. It was warm and rhythmic and steady, and kneeling there in the February sunlight with my palm against the earth, I felt something I had not felt since I left the station. I felt addressed. Not watched. Not hunted. Addressed. As if whatever was down there knew I was above it and was acknowledging my presence with the same patience it had shown for years, for decades, for however long it had been tapping. I pulled my hand away and stood up and walked back to my car and drove home and didn't tell anyone. The next morning, I checked the OSHA database for Station 14. A new filing. Dated 6 days earlier. Incident type: employee non-occupational disappearance, no workplace contributing factors identified. Employee: Reardon, Yvette M. Status: voluntary separation pending further information. Yvette was gone. I called Crucible's HR department. I identified myself as a former employee and asked about the current operator at Station 14. The representative checked and told me the position was vacant and that they were accepting applications for a replacement. How long has it been vacant? I asked. According to our records, since February 11th. What happened to the previous operator? I'm not able to share details of another employee's status. I can tell you that the position is open if you're interested in reapplying. I asked about Yvette's personal effects. The representative said that all belongings had been collected by the company and were in storage pending contact from next of kin. Were there boots? I asked. Excuse me. At the door. Were there boots at the door? A long silence. I don't have that level of detail available, ma'am. Is there anything else I can help you with? I hung up. I opened the assignment record PDF and scrolled to the bottom. Yvette Riordan's end date had been filled in, February 11th. Below her entry, my second listing remained. Name: Dara Kessler. Assignment start, blank. Assignment end, blank. Waiting. 3 weeks passed. I continued going to work. I continued logging the nightly vibration data, which had reached 0.012 millimeters per second, still faint by engineering standards, but I could feel it through my mattress now, a gentle rhythmic pressure against my spine. The Belen calls continued at 2:17 a.m. I wore the headphones. I did not look south. I did not measure the room. On March 2nd, I received a text from an unknown number. No country code anomaly this time, it appeared to be a standard domestic cell number with a 520 area code, which is Southern Arizona. The text read, "Dara, it's Gil. I need to tell you something about the card." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Gil Peterson. Yes. I should have told you before I left. There used to be 6 rules. My throat tightened. What was the 6th? Don't come back. It was the first one on the original card. Someone removed it before I got there. I only found out because Roy told Sandra, and Sandra told me after I'd already left. Why was it removed? Because it doesn't work. Everyone comes back. The 6th rule was taken off because it was the only one people couldn't follow. I set the phone down. I picked it up again. Gil, where are you? Station 17. They moved me to 17 after I left 14. I've been here 6 months. Station 17. The other attended post. The one whose inspector had gone missing on March 2nd, the date at the very beginning of this account, the date whose incident report I found when I was still just a graduate student researching an unusual job posting. Gil, is Station 17 the same? Every attended post on the line is the same. 11, 14, 17. Same card. Same rules. Same thing underneath. Same thing underneath all three. Same thing underneath all of them because it's one thing, Dara. The pipeline didn't create it. The pipeline was routed along the corridor because the corridor was already there. Someone at Crucible knows. The attended posts aren't monitoring the gas line. The gas line is the excuse for maintaining human presence at 3 points along a 240-mile subsurface structure that requires witnesses. Requires them for what? Gil didn't respond for 12 hours. When he did, the message was short. I think it needs to know it's being heard. I think the tapping is a question. I think it's been asking for a very long time, and the attended posts are the only place where anyone is close enough to feel it, and the rules are how you survive being close enough to feel it without answering. What happens if you answer? I think Roy answered. I think Calvin answered. I think that's what walking south is. That's what opening the door is. It's saying yes. The last message from Gil arrived at 2:17 a.m. the following night. It appeared on my phone as a standard text, but when I tried to reply, the number was no longer in service. When I searched my message history the next morning, the conversation was gone. Not deleted, gone. As if it had never existed. My phone's storage showed no record of any messages from a 520 number. But I had written his words down on paper during the night. I still have the paper. It's April now. 14 months since I left the station. The vibration is at 0.016 millimeters per second and rising. The south wall of my apartment feels close, though I don't measure it. The phone rings every night at 2:17 and I don't answer. The headphones are on my head more hours than they're off. I check the OSHA database every week. Gil Peterson is not listed as missing from Station 17. But Gil Peterson is not listed as employed at Station 17 either. His name does not appear in Crucible's system at all. I know this because I called HR again, asking about him specifically, and they told me they had no record of a Gilbert Peterson ever working for the company in any capacity. He trained me. He handed me the card. He showed me the generator and the water tank and the telemetry console. He existed. I watched him drive away. And now the system says he didn't. Last week, the consulting firm assigned me to a new project. Soil assessment for a solar installation in the western desert. The site is 40 miles from Station 14. I told my supervisor I couldn't take it. She asked why. I said personal reasons. She reassigned it. But this morning, when I opened my email, there was a message from Crucible Energy HR. The subject line was, Attended Post Operator, Station 14, Application Received. I did not apply. The body of the email thanked me for my interest and confirmed that my start date was pending. It referenced my previous satisfactory service and noted that my badge had never been deactivated. At the bottom, below the HR coordinator's signature, there was a single line of text in smaller font that I almost missed. Personnel count updated, 2. I'm sitting in my apartment. It's 10:47 p.m. The floor is vibrating beneath my feet, 3 and 3, steady as a heartbeat. The south wall is right where it's always been, or closer, or the same, because I don't measure it anymore. The headphones are around my neck. The phone will ring in 3 hours and 30 minutes. I have the laminated card in my desk drawer. I took it with me when I left the station. I shouldn't have, it was supposed to stay for Yvette. But I made her a copy and kept the original, and I've been holding it for 14 months, and the handwriting is still small and neat, and the lamination is still soft at the edges, and somewhere beneath all the handling and the heat and the years, someone wrote 5 rules on this card because 6 didn't work, and the one they removed was the most important. Don't come back. Everyone comes back. I haven't decided yet. That's what I tell myself. I have a job and an apartment and a thesis that's been published and a life that works, and the vibration is subtle enough that I can pretend it's the building, and the phone calls are easy enough to ignore, and the wall is close but not that close, and I haven't looked south in months. But the assignment record has my name at the bottom with no dates, and the badge was never deactivated, and the personnel count was always 2, and something beneath the Sonoran Desert has been asking a question in groups of 3 for longer than the pipeline, longer than the station, longer than the road that leads to it. And tonight, for the first time, when I put my palm flat against the floor of my apartment and felt the rhythm come up through my hand and into my arm and settle behind my sternum like a second pulse, I almost tapped back.